Hi everyone. This first video in the playlist is going to be an introduction to the new packet and specifically an activity that's meant to help us kind of dip our toes into the new topic. Even though you don't have the physical packet with you at home, hopefully you can kind of keep up with the PDFs that are being posted in our learning plan, which you can see on the screen here, because even though the physical packet is a nice help, the material is what's important, and the material will kind of be posted week by week, basically as if you had the paper in front of you. If you want to print a copy so you have something to interact with, it might be a good idea. If you don't really feel like you need to, you can always just refer to the new packet pages using the blank page PDF links. For example, I'm clicking on one just that you can kind of see what I'm talking about here. And you can always interact digitally with the questions, but write things down on paper if you feel like you need to show some work. And the idea is that we're basically just going to kind of walk through, as if we were going in class order, the pages in the packet and the concepts presented therein. The first task, Wednesday's task, is to explore page 2, which begins our look at sequences. This entire chapter is about sequences and series, which really just boil down to patterns. The last really big chunk of our semester is spent looking at patterns and breaking down patterns to start to recognize how patterns behave both in equation forms and graphically. Because you probably have a pretty good instinct for pattern finding already, we're going to try, if we can, to capitalize on those instincts in this first lesson by simply allowing you to kind of explore some sequences and patterns without necessarily even knowing what you're getting into, just so you can kind of feel your way out, just sort of tap into those instincts, especially if you're not really sure what kind of patterns to which I'm referring at the moment. Now, again, just for reference, I'm going to be walking today through page 2, and all of the videos in this playlist are going to be about page 2 only. In a subsequent playlist, we'll talk about what you need to do for page 3, which is technically Thursday's task. But that said, if you want to work ahead, or if you don't really want to abide by these day of the week guidelines, you are certainly welcome to work at whatever pace suits you. So if you feel like you get the hang of it based on what we're doing on the first playlist, so the page 2 playlist, feel free to work ahead or to ignore these videos altogether and kind of chart out on your own. All of the answer keys are posted in the learning plan. So underneath each lesson, you can see that it has not only the link to the blank pages, but the key as well. And if you feel like you can do at least some, if not all of these without doing any of the video work, you are welcome to skip these videos and just go right into page 2 and on Thursday, page 3, without actually having to watch or listen to all of this. The purpose of the videos is basically to mimic what we would normally do in class, figuring that if you need some instructions or if you just need a little bit of guidance, the videos will provide that. But again, they're totally optional, so you use your best discretion as you see fit. Now, assuming that you're going to kind of start on page 2 of the packet with the first lesson, the beginning activity was meant to be a card sort. And even though you don't have the physical cards in front of you, the goal is basically to say to ourselves, okay, well, what kind of patterns are we talking about and how can I make sense of them? So I made a digital card sort in the hopes that you can sort of mimic that idea from home. If you go to the learning plan and find the part that says complete Desmos lesson 7A, click the link that says Desmos. If yours is like mine, it'll come up with a little secondary thing to click. But if you click and open, it should open a new tab pre-populated with a class code, and the class code is XEQPCW. If you press join, you'll probably be prompted to sign in. If you're not already, you can just click sign in with Google. If it saves on your computer your Google credentials, then you can always just kind of figure out what to type in. Usually your student.whsd account is fine. And then, of course, it'll kind of lead you through the sign-in steps. Now, once you get to this point, you'll see this kind of crazy looking screen. This screen is the matching activity that you'll see referred to in the packet where it says match each sequence, green card, to its equation, blue card. These are the cards. If they're too small for you to identify, especially if you have a really small screen at home, you can click on a card and it makes it a little bit bigger, which should make it a bit easier to make out what's going on. Now, the green cards are all different representations of patterns. You can see that some of them are tabular in nature. So this one, for example, has a table of values with n and t of n instead of x and y. But n and t of n are just kind of like the two variables that we always consider x and y, namely that n is kind of like an x, an input, and t of n is kind of like a y coordinate or an output. So as you're looking at each thing, you might want to quickly just kind of click just so you can get a sense of what exactly we're dealing with here. And then familiarize yourself with what you see with the blue cards. The blue cards are equations. And again, you can see that notation is consistent here. Here's n as a variable and t of n. So familiarizing yourself with the structure of the equations, even though you might not have necessarily seen this structure before, is actually part of the point of this exercise. And try to do a little bit of troubleshooting, a little bit of critical thinking to simply ask yourself, what might be going on here? And how can I make sense of this, even if I've never seen it before? Now, the point of this whole activity is to try to match a blue and a green. And how you do this can vary. Some people will use certain processes of elimination or common sense. Some people are just going to kind of think about this in any way that seems to register to them. So I'm purposely not going to give you a lot of directions or examples here because I want the pattern finding part of your brain to kick in. In other words, if this truly is a new experience, what kind of troubleshooting methods can you go through? What kind of logic can you apply to this or overlay on this activity if you just are kind of in a whole new unfamiliar territory? So, for example, take a look at some of these. Maybe, like, for example, one with words. That might be a good familiar starting point. This one says start with 6 bacteria in a petri dish. Each day, the number of bacteria in the dish triples. So if I'm looking for an equation that goes with that, I'm definitely looking for an equation that has a 6 in it. That seems logical. And tripling makes me think of the number 3. So I can definitely consider looking for an equation that has a 6 and a 3 in it. And as I start to kind of look around, I can definitely identify this is an equation that has a 6 and a 3. And if I keep looking, I actually don't see any other blue equations that have a 6 and a 3. So instinctively, my gut is telling me that these two things go together. And if you simply drag one on top of the other, they kind of click together or snap together. And then you'll see this pairing that says 2 cards, which means you've successfully paired something. It doesn't tell you if you're right or wrong, unfortunately, on this Desmos interface. But if you do want to check your answers, you can actually go back to the learning plan and check the answer key for page 2, which is linked right below where you got the Desmos link, and you can check your answers individually as you go. The goal, though, if you can, is to actually hold off on that step and to not check, but instead use your gut a little bit. Look at the structure of the equation that we ended up choosing and notice where the 6 is. Notice where the 3 is in the equation. 6 is outside, 3 is inside a set of parentheses, and 3 is being raised to the power of n. That's an interesting structure that we may not have necessarily seen before. So try to use some of your pattern finding skills without just quickly looking at the answer key and figuring out all the matches, because it's that deductive reasoning that's going to help you pick up on some patterns and trends. You'll notice why, after you do a few of these, that the 6 is outside. You'll notice why the 3 is inside. You'll notice the significance of the 6 versus the significance of the 3 in the situation. And you'll be able to compare it to other situations. Like, for example, this one in card number 4. Start with 10 pennies. Each day, add 3 more pennies to the jar. This one grammatically is structured really similarly to the one with the petri dish. Start with, and they give you a number, and then it tells you what's happening in terms of the pattern's growth. So keep those things in mind as you start to kind of put together some commonalities between these cards that sort of look the same. Obviously, all of the cards that have words are going to follow a very similar structure. But once you figure out the structure for something like the words, see if you can adapt that structure to things with tables or things with graphs. Tables and graphs are virtually communicating the same pieces of information because tables contain sets of coordinates and graphs contain sets of coordinates. So it's unlikely that you would do something different for those two. But again, The more you can pick up on patterns and the more you notice, the easier it's going to be to start to abstract things and to say to yourself, oh, wait a minute, I get this. Now I understand why there's a number outside parentheses, for example, or what the number inside of the parentheses of an equation is trying to do. You'll also start to pick up on why some equations have parentheses and why some don't. For example, this card letter N has 3 plus 4n, no parentheses. The n is not an exponent like it is in some of the other cards. And there's a plus sign, where in other cards there seems to be no implied operation or a multiplication by default, but no explicit plus or minus signs. So again, lots of things to notice and lots of things to wonder. I hope that you'll go through this activity wondering things and not getting frustrated for not knowing the answers right off the bat. This is meant to be an exploratory activity, which is to say it's meant to be a curiosity inducing adventure. Don't worry too much right now about getting the answers right. Just try to play around with things and notice. The nice thing about being able to do this on your own is that you can take as much or as little time on this as you want. The downside, of course, is that if you have an idea, but you're not really sure about it, there isn't really anybody necessarily sitting right next to you like we have in class where you can just throw that idea out there or hear what their ideas are. So if you feel like you're stuck on something, or if you feel like conceptually there's something that you want to understand, but you're not really sure if you have the right idea, you're welcome to send me an email at any time. My email address is linked on the Google Classroom as well as in the emails that you've been receiving from me. So feel free to reach out, especially if you have an idea about something and you just want to kind of talk it out. In the next video, we'll talk specifically about what to do after you successfully complete the card sort. So before clicking on and opening the next video, try to complete the card sort, meaning make all of your matches, and then check out the answer key in the learning plan and see how many you got correct. If you got the majority of them correct, then I would say you're ready to go into the actual packet questions and to start answering the questions from 21 to 25. In the next video, I'll give you a small introduction to what to do there. But again, you don't have to watch the videos to be able to do these tasks. If you feel like you get it, you are certainly welcome to kind of charge on. You have access to the answer key, and you are definitely encouraged to work ahead and to work on your own without my guidance, figuring that this whole pattern finding exercise is definitely best done individually.